Continuation. By the 8th century, the Tibetan Empire had become one of the most formidable powers in Asia, rivaling Tang China and the Abbasid Caliphate. The struggle for control over the Silk Road, a vital artery connecting East and West, flared up with renewed intensity. Caravanserais and fortified cities of Central Asia became battlegrounds for power, wealth, and influence. But how did Tibet, a country long considered isolated and mobile, insignificant, manage to grow into an empire capable of challenging the great states of its time? What military, political, and cultural decisions allowed it to achieve power? And why, after just a few generations, did this once formidable state collapse, leaving behind only legends? Welcome to the Amazing History Channel, a community for those who are truly passionate about the past. We continue our series on the ancient civilizations of Asia. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that you can support the channel through sponsorship on YouTube or Patreon. And your like and subscription will help the project grow and bring you new exciting stories. Now let's dive into the mysterious and dramatic history of the Tibetan Empire. To understand how the Tibetan Empire reached its peak, historians turn to the earliest records of its formation and to the figure of a young ruler who would later become known as Songtsen Gampo, the wise ruler. It was he who united the scattered Tibetan clans, turning a small mountain kingdom into a power capable of changing the course of Asian history. The early pages of Tibetan history take us to the valleys of the Yarlung River, the fertile heart of the region. According to ancient chronicles, it was here, at the beginning of the 7th century, that the father of the future emperor founded a small but warlike kingdom. He led successful campaigns against the northern neighbors, expanding his territories, but holding control over the conquered lands turned out to be much more difficult. No sooner had the conquered territories accepted their new ruler than a rebellion broke out. In 618, when his son Songtsen Gampo was only 13 years old, conspirators poisoned the ruler. The new Tsenpo, that is, the emperor, faced a severe trial. The fragile state was at risk of falling apart. However, despite his young age, he showed composure and foresight. Understanding that the only way to save the state was an immediate response, he enlisted the support of loyal ministers and military commanders, making them swear an oath of allegiance. Without giving the rebels time to regroup, his army struck first. In a short but fierce campaign, the rebellion was suppressed and Songtsen Gampo secured his throne, showing that he could not be underestimated. Having united Tibet under his rule, the young ruler began to think about the future. The valleys of the Yarlung River provided a reliable food supply, and the mountain fortresses offered protection, but the neighboring lands were full of challenges and opportunities. To the north were the nomadic Sumpa tribes, who had already risen in rebellion against his father. To the southwest lay the wealthy kingdom of Nepal, which controlled the trade routes between India and Tibet. To the west was the mysterious state of Shangshung, and beyond the deserts and steppes roamed the warlike Tagan people, who possessed rich pastures near Lake Kokonor. And finally, in the east, Tang China was beginning to regain its former power, weakened after the fall of the Sui dynasty, but still remaining a formidable force. Songtsen Gampo faced a difficult choice. Should he try to strengthen his state through diplomatic alliances or resort to military expansion? In the end, he chose both paths. Realizing that his army was outnumbered by neighboring powers, he relied on tactics and cunning. Where victory could not be achieved in open battle, he used dynastic marriage policies, espionage, and economic pressure. The first serious threat to the young Tibetan state was the nomadic Sumpa tribe, which lived to the northeast of Songtsen Gampo's domain. These nomads controlled vast pastures and could pose a threat. But instead of entering into open confrontation, the Tibetan ruler offered them a favorable agreement. The Tibetans provided the Sumpa with warriors and herders, helping to protect their herds and lands. Over time, this agreement turned into an asymmetric alliance. The Tibetan army effectively became the main force protecting the Sumpa tribe from external threats. Thus, without the nomads even noticing, their dependence on Tibet only grew. When Songtsen Gampo gained enough power, he didn't have to resort to force. The Sumpa simply became part of his state. This gave Tibet control over new pastures, increased the number of livestock, and provided additional military resources, which soon proved useful in new conquests. Songtsen Gampo's next target was the kingdom of Shangshung, a powerful state located to the west of Tibet. Its ruler, King Ligmikyan, was known as a strong warrior and a skilled politician. A direct war with him could drag on, so the Tibetan Sumpa chose a different path. Cunning. He offered the king a dynastic alliance by marrying off his sister Seer to him. However, this marriage was less of an alliance and more of a carefully planned espionage operation. According to Tibetan chronicles, Seer soon came to hate her husband and steadily worked against him. Through trusted agents, she passed information to her brother about Shangshung's internal politics, court intrigues, and troop movements. The chance to strike a fatal blow came when Ligmikyan set out on a campaign to the west, to the lands of Sumpa. His route passed through territories already under the control of Songtsen Gampo, and the Tibetans took advantage of this. In a narrow mountain gorge, an ambush awaited the royal entourage. The best Tibetan archers attacked the convoy, and Ligmikyan was killed, and his guards were wiped out. The ruler's death led to chaos in Shangshung. A struggle for power began, and here Seer once again played her role. By supporting the right clans, she ensured an easy victory for her brother. Soon the local chiefs swore allegiance to Songtsen Gampo, and Shangshung finally became part of the Tibetan Empire. In history, central and western Tibet were united under one rule, which became a decisive step toward the creation of a powerful state. While the Tibetan Empire was consolidating its position, an unexpected opportunity arose to establish control over the southern territories as well. A dynastic struggle broke out in Nepal. The rightful heir to the throne, Prince Narendra Deva, was overthrown by his own uncle and was forced to flee from Kathmandu. Songtsen Gampo saw an opportunity in this situation. Instead of recognizing the usurper, he gave Narendra Deva asylum and then in 641 helped him regain the throne. However, it was not through peaceful negotiations, but by force. At the head of the Tibetan army, Narendra Deva entered Kathmandu, defeated his opponents, and reclaimed the throne. Formally, Nepal remained an independent kingdom, but in reality it became a vassal of Tibet. This gave Songtsen Gampo strategically important advantages, a wealthy ally to the south, influence in the Himalayas, and most importantly, control over key trade routes connecting India and Tibet. While Tang China was trying to recover its strength, the Tibetan army was rapidly gaining power. Songtsen Gampo proved that he could win not only on the battlefield, but also through subtle politics and strategic calculation. But his ambitions went further. The next target was China, an ancient and powerful neighbor, and the confrontation with it would change the fate of all Asia. After the rapid conquests, Tibet faced a new problem: how to effectively govern diverse peoples. Empires needed laws, orders, taxes, and archives, but all of this was communicated orally or with primitive notches on sticks. Such a system worked for a small kingdom, but it could not provide stability for a vast state. Songtsen Gampo understood. Without writing, Tibet would not be able to become a full-fledged power. The solution came from the south. Inspired by the traditions of India, China, and Nepal, he sent a mission to India to create his own alphabet. This journey turned out to be extremely dangerous. Scholars died from diseases, attacks by bandits, and unbearable heat. However, one of them, Tan Mi, managed to complete the task. He studied Indian writing systems, reworked them, and adapted them for the Tibetan language. This is how the first Tibetan alphabet appeared. Tan Mi himself received the honorary name Samkota, the scholar of Tibet. The introduction of writing was a revolution. For the first time, laws were recorded. It became possible to document historical events, and the administration of provinces improved. Now the emperor's power was supported not only by the strength of the sword, but also by the power of the word. Meanwhile, a new confrontation was brewing in the east. China, having recovered from internal strife, began its expansion into Central Asia. In the 630s, the Tang army defeated the kingdom of Tagon, which for many years had served as a buffer between Tibet and China. Now the two great powers found themselves, as they say, face to face. Songtsen Gampo, following his strategy, decided to try to avoid war through a dynastic marriage. In 634, he sent an embassy to the Tang capital Chang'an, proposing to marry a Chinese princess. The embassy was led by the experienced diplomat and military commander Gar Songtsen. The Chinese response was cold. The princess was handed over to the remnants of the Tagon tribe, a former buffer state. to reinforce their dependence on China. It was an insult. The Tang court did not take Tibet seriously, considering it just a mountain state. When the embassy returned with a refusal, Songtsen Gampo was furious. China does not respect Tibet, so it will have to be taught respect. By 638, the Tibetan army moved eastward. The first target was the former territories of Tagon. The Tibetans defeated the Chinese garrisons and drove them out of the region. Then attacks on important strategic points followed. In 640, the Tibetan army threatened Lanzhou and then even Chang'an itself. Now the Chinese realized that Tibet was not just a barbarian state, but an equal rival. In 640, the Tang court requested peace. As a sign of reconciliation, the Chinese emperor agreed to marry Princess Wencheng to Songtsen Gampo. In 641, Princess Wencheng arrived in Tibet not empty-handed. Along with her, Chinese influence entered the country, a library of Buddhist texts, architectural and agricultural knowledge, as well as a statue of Buddha that would become a sacred relic for the Tibetan people. This alliance marked the beginning of a cultural transformation. Buddhism, previously almost unknown in Tibet, began to spread at the royal court. The elite increasingly leaned toward the new religion, and soon it would become an integral part of Tibetan civilization. Thus, by the middle of the 7th century, Tibet had established itself as a great power, capable of waging wars with China, forming diplomatic alliances, and reforming its own culture. But this was only the first step on the path to true imperial glory. By the mid-7th century, the Tibetan Empire was one of Central Asia's most powerful states. However, despite territorial conquests and diplomatic successes, its elite had not yet fully embraced Buddhism. Tibet remained a pagan state, where traditional beliefs dominated society. Nevertheless, the influence of Buddhism was gradually growing. Under the influence of his wives, the Nepalese and Chinese princesses, Songtsen Gampo began to show interest in the new religion. Although during his time Buddhism remained only a court tradition, it was then that the first Buddhist temples were built. The most significant of them was the majestic Lhasa Jokang Temple. Originally, it served as a place to keep sacred relics brought to Tibet by the Chinese and Nepalese princesses. Later, Jokang became the heart of Tibetan Buddhism and a symbol of the country's spiritual heritage. By the 640s, the ruler abandoned aggressive wars in favor of strengthening his power over the conquered lands. The last major military campaign of his era took place in 648 in northern India, but its significance was less than that of internal affairs. The situation in Shangshung was especially troubling, where discontent was brewing among the nobility. Songtsen Gampo sought to prevent a possible uprising by consolidating Tibetan rule in the region. In 649, the emperor's health deteriorated, and he soon passed away. His death coincided with the passing of another great ruler, the emperor of the Chinese Tang dynasty, who was his adversary, ally, and rival at the same time. The body of Songtsen Gampo was transported to the Valley of the Kings, where it rested in a massive tomb. After the emperor's death, Tibet faced the issue of succession to the throne. The only son of Songtsen Gampo died during his lifetime, and the throne passed to his young grandson. This created a power vacuum, which was quickly filled by Gar Songtsen, the head of the powerful Gar clan. Gar Songtsen took control of the country, becoming the regent. He established control over the army and finances, and then, relying on military force, continued the policy of expansion. In the 660s, the Chinese Tang Empire, now under the rule of Empress Wu Zetian, defeated the Western Turkic Khaganate and captured the key Silk Road cities of Kucha and Khotan. China strengthened its position, but this meant a threat to Tibetan influence in the region. Gar Sengtsan decided to take action. In 661, he secretly formed an alliance with the remnants of the Turkic Khaganate and launched an offensive. The first targets were Kucha and Khotan, which the Tibetans captured without a fight, taking advantage of the exhaustion of the Chinese troops. In 663, Gara's army struck again. Through the high mountain passes, the Tibetans penetrated into the Tarim Basin. The Chinese tried to stop them, but due to a lack of reinforcements, they were defeated. By the end of the campaign, Tibet had established control over the trade routes of Central Asia, strengthening its economic power. In 666, the aging Gar Sengchan handed over power to his clan. However, his sons were unable to maintain unity. The Tibetan Empire ended up divided into several autonomous domains. This effectively turned it into a federation of feudal principalities. Meanwhile, the young emperor, having come of age, began the struggle for real power. The confrontation between the dynastic nobility and the Gar clan was rapidly escalating, threatening to plunge the empire into civil war. In 60 years, Tibet went from a small mountain kingdom to a great power rivaling China. Contacts with India, Nepal, and the Tang Empire brought Buddhism and a writing system to the country, and control over trade routes made it economically prosperous. However, fragmentation and the struggle for power threatened the further development of the state. Will the young emperor be able to hold on to power, or will the country plunge into chaos? New challenges lay ahead for Tibet. But that's all from me for now. If you want to see more of Tibet's story, let me know in the comments. Also support the video by sharing and watching it all the way through. See you!